Hey everyone. This is a piece from The Fate of the Russian Revolution, Lost Texts of Critical Marxism, edited by Matgamna. This is from section 8 of the book, titled From quote Orthodoxy to Millenarianism 1. Who will make the revolution? The piece that I'm reading in this video is titled From Anti-Hitlerism to Socialism by Albert Glotzer. The footnote says, abridged from New International, June 1943, issues on the national question. This is a polemic against an earlier work by C.L.R. James, who, writing under the pen name J.R. Johnson, criticized the Workers' Party's emphasis on national liberation and democratic slogans for Europe, and counterposed the perspective of an immediate revolutionary struggle under directly socialist slogans. But prior to this piece, there's a little introduction to the section that this piece is from as a whole, and I'm going to read that because it's only a paragraph. So, from quote Orthodoxy to Millenarianism 1, who will make the revolution? As it turned out, the expectations held by all the Trotskyists, the quote Orthodox and the others alike, of great revolutionary upheavals in Europe at the end of World War II were disappointed. There were upheavals, there was radicalization, but the combined effects of the destruction of working-class political culture by Stalinism, Stalinist terrorism, and astute concessions by the ruling classes kept the lid on. In hindsight, the perspective discussed in the text in this chapter of the Trotskyists winning the leadership of the anti-Nazi resistance was probably always unreal. Yet in these texts there is a debate of continuing relevance. One concept of what organized Marxian socialists can and must do in mass upheavals is counterposed to another. Al Glotzer's articles argue for active, creative tactics to regenerate a broad working-class socialist movement by agitation around democratic and immediate issues. In other words, for a strategy with a rational connection between ends, socialism, and means, development of the labor movement. The quote Orthodox Trotskyists, together with a minority around C.L.R. James, J.R. Johnson, of the quote unorthodox, upheld a concept which essentially saw the role of the Revolutionary Party as just being there, with strong organization and a, quote, finished, end quote, revolutionary program to meet a revolutionary workers' movement which would develop almost automatically. They thus began to drift from rational politics to millenarianism, a politics based on hope for an all-transforming event to be brought about by some superhuman force, in this case, quote, history, end quote. So that introduction was by Matgamna, of course. And here's the piece from Al Glotzer, From Anti-Hitlerism to Socialism. The idea that capitalism has long outlived its progressive functions has been propagated for several decades by Marxian socialists. It has been the central theme of their world program described by the graphic term capitalist barbarism or socialism. By capitalist barbarism is understood a condition where the social order, in a state of decay and disintegration, continues to exist without the prospect of its replacement by a new and higher order of society, namely socialism. By counterposing these alternatives, revolutionary socialists placed on the order of the day the socialist revolution as a practical international goal. Thus, Lenin characterized the present epoch as a period of, quote, wars and revolutions, end quote. In this way, he succinctly described the chaos of imperialist capitalism. The concept is thereafter embodied in all the writings and in the thinking of the modern generation of revolutionary socialists. Moreover, it has been and continues to be the central thesis of any Marxist analysis of the objective world situation which predetermines the active program for the realization of socialism. On the basis of the above conception of modern capitalism as an outlived social order, the internationalists of the heroic period of the Communist International developed the slogan of the Socialist United States of Europe. This was the socialist solution to the impasse of European society in the 1914-18 post-war period. The slogan, adopted by the Comintern in 1923, was thereafter incorporated in the programs of the individual revolutionary parties. In this way was presented the progressive socialist way out of the morass of European society, in opposition to the bourgeois continuation of the chaos. Footnote. The slogan was adopted after considerable dispute inside the Comintern. Lenin, for example, hesitated for a long time before he assented to the adoption of the slogan into the program because, under the conditions which existed at the time, Lenin feared that the slogan might cause the revolutionary parties to overlook, modify, or weaken their activities in their respective countries which were directed towards the organization of the masses, with the specific aim of establishing the workers' power in the intensely revolutionary European situation which then existed. Lenin also feared, as a result of Bukharin's concept of the permanent revolution as a simultaneous European process in which the workers would seize power at once on a continental scale, that the entire international might become disoriented by the slogan. Bukharin's views had at that time great popularity. Once adopted, however, it was put in its proper place as outlined in this article. Why then was the slogan adopted in 1923? Because it was the belief and hope of the Comintern that a victory in Germany was virtually assured, and therefore the whole question of the socialist organization of Europe would instantly become an actual question for the working class. It was the immediate possibility of state power in the West which made the slogan a reality in 1923. The defeat in Germany did not alter the programmatic place of the slogan, since it held true as long as decadent capitalism existed, but its utilization depended upon how close the proletariat, through its parties, was to Soviet state power. End footnote. The Russian Revolution was the first successful evidence of the new order emerging from this chaos. The Socialist United States of Europe would have marked a higher stage in the development of the new society. It would have ensured the victory of world socialism. With this in mind, the Communist International during the years 1919 to 24 developed a strategy and series of tactics designed to win for it the support of the majority of the masses, to bring into harmony the activities of its affiliated parties with the revolutionary possibilities latent in the objective conditions of a moribund European capitalism. If the Comintern of Lenin and Trotsky failed, it was due not to the absence of the historical stage, quote, barbarism or socialism, end quote, or the lack of the essential complementary objective conditions, but solely to the failings of the revolutionary parties. In consequence, Allied imperialism was able to create its reactionary system of small states, not only to establish a certain delicate balance between the capitalist powers in Europe, but equally to establish a barrier against the development of the indispensable socialist United States of Europe. The logic of the crisis of capitalist society, however, was so powerful that even sections of the bourgeoisie, their politicians and theorists, developed and advocated programs for a United States of Europe, naturally not a socialist United States, which in their mind implied a, quote, unification under the domination of one or a set of imperialist powers. This idea, in its variegated forms, persists to this day. The inability of the democratic bourgeoisie to realize its program resulted from the specific relations between the national states and the fact that its kind of United States depended on a military struggle for power. Hitler, in form at least, has established a, quote, unified, end quote, Europe, the unification of the sword and flame, wherein Germany, as the one economic, political, and military power, exploits the continent in the interests of the Reich's imperialist ruling class. It is important to bear in mind that, however overripe the objective conditions of European capitalism had been for socialism, they did not automatically mean the victory of socialism, for in the final analysis, the factor which is all decisive is the subjective fact force. The organization, strength, intelligence, and will to power of the revolutionary socialist parties, equipped with an unassailably correct program. One important distinction must be borne in mind even when recognizing the fact that the Socialist United States of Europe was a central thesis of the Marxist program. This end aim for Europe was itself contingent upon the national victories of the parties of socialism. Even in the good days of the Comintern, the slogan of the Socialist United States of Europe was not the main active slogan of the revolutionary parties. It was a programmatic and ultimate European goal. Yet the necessity of the slogan and its urgency were just as valid and historically correct as they are now. Moreover, the Communist International had something with which to give substance and power to the slogan. The Comintern did not view the slogan as being achieved automatically, spontaneously, and simultaneously. In the concept of Lenin, the Socialist United States of Europe would be inevitable only after the victory of the workers in a number of European countries. Again, in the minds of the Marxists, the subjective factor, in view of the decline and decay of capitalism, became in turn an objective factor of inestimable significance, nay, of decisive importance. This is a change from quantity to quality. For this reason, the question of the vanguard organization, its program and its transitional policies, its tactics and their application, was and remains today the fundamental problem of the epoch. Footnote. In, quote, The Way Out for Europe, end quote, which is a piece, everything is stood on its head. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's a slogan. In, quote, The Way Out for Europe, end quote, everything is stood on its head. Oh, no, that is a piece by Johnson, J.R. Johnson, excuse me. Johnson shows, by the development of this thesis, that he has no comprehension of the main problem which the Marxist movement is confronted with in the present period of capitalist decline. The fact that the working class has suffered a series of uninterrupted and paralyzing defeats for 25 years, the fact that the working class movement as an organized political force in Europe does not exist, has completely passed him by, as we shall demonstrate by Johnson's own words. End footnote. Where am I? In the resolution of the Workers' Party, the New International, February 1943, there is indicated the kind of epoch in which we live. It is upon this concept that the entire resolution is predicated. In proceeding on this basis, the resolution is in keeping with the tradition of Marxism. What is new in this resolution? The, quote, unification, end quote, of Europe under German fascism, i.e. its conquest, which has reduced the European nations and the European masses to the state of oppressed and conquered peoples, has revived the national question on the continent. This, quote, unification, end quote, of the continent by German arms has reintroduced the problem of national liberation as a burning question and need for the nationally oppressed European masses. The resolution points out that the, quote, mass movements, end quote, in Europe today are largely movements which have been born around the single issue of national freedom from the yoke of a foreign oppressor. That this struggle for national liberation will rekindle the whole struggle between the classes for power. Quote, for the old order or the new, end quote. That there is a possibility of recreating the vanguard party through the instrumentality of these national movements. That these movements are plebeian movements which, in the context of the European situation, are basically progressive, that national liberation, when and if realized, no matter if only for a few days or a few months, can only pose the question of the workers' power, that revolutionary socialists must support these movements, integrate themselves in them, in order not to lose contact with the masses and to prevent these movements from becoming the instruments of an unchallenged imperialism. That the national movements are transitional in nature, and the participation of socialists in them is part of a transitional program leading to the struggle for socialism, that before the slogan of the Socialist United States of Europe can become a reality and an action slogan, we will see the reestablishment of the national states, and more important, this development will be necessary to reestablish the International of Socialism as a genuinely functioning organization composed of a number of revolutionary socialist parties in the leading European countries. Finally, that the Socialist United States of Europe remains a central programmatic concept and slogan for revolutionary socialists. In one place in his article, Johnson makes reference to Trotsky for the purpose of proving that the national question in Europe does not exist. The case in point is an article written by Trotsky on the occasion of the Czechoslovakian crisis. The New International, November 1938. Trotsky stated that the German seizure of the Czech Republic would not cause the working class movement to raise the slogan of national independence and organize for the defense of the bourgeois state. Johnson continues to quote Trotsky to the effect that there is no national question in Europe, ... There's no quotation marks, but I'm assuming there's a quotation marks, or maybe it's not quotation marks. Or it might be, Matgamna said it was a bridge, so ... Do Just forget how I said about quotes. Let's assume there's no quotes here. ... Unless a new war ends in a military victory for this or that imperialist camp, if the war fails to bring forth the workers' power, if a new imperialist peace is concluded, etc. In other words, Trotsky posed a number of ifs in a changing world situation. The war has not yet ended, but the conditions created by the conflict, the unforeseen Hitlerian sweep over the continent, have given rebirth to the national question. Trotsky 5 years ago dismissed these possibilities, and Johnson, not in 1938, but in 1943, says that none of these probable conditions posed by Trotsky have occurred. For emphasis, he adds, quote, most obviously not, end quote. Elsewhere, he writes, quote, behind any proposal to make a change, what kind of change and who proposes it? Albert Glotzer. Where am I? End parenthesis. In the application of the socialist slogan, undoubtedly lurks some variant of the idea that Lenin put forward in 1915, given certain conditions of continued reaction and domination of Europe by a single power, a great national war is once more possible in Europe. No such situation as Lenin envisaged is visible in Europe today. No such situation as Lenin envisaged is visible in Europe today, end quote. J.R. Johnson or C.L.R. James. As clear as crystal, and therefore we shall return to this crucial selection from the Johnson contribution. In his article, The Pamphlet by Junius, Lenin takes up the question of a probable return to national wars in Europe. What he says is also clear. Quote, it is highly improbable that this imperialist war of 1914 to 16 will be transformed into a national war. ... Nevertheless, it cannot be said that such a transformation is impossible. If the European proletariat were to remain impotent for another 20 years, if the present war were to end in victories similar to those achieved by Napoleon in the subjugation of a number of virile national states, if imperialism outside Europe, primarily American and Japanese, were to remain in power for another 20 years without a transition to socialism, say as a result of Japanese-American war, then a great national war in Europe would be possible. This means that Europe would be... One second. This means that Europe would be thrown back for several decades. This is improbable, but it is not impossible, for to picture world history as advancing smoothly and steadily without sometimes taking gigantic strides backwards is undialectical, unscientific, and theoretically wrong, end quote. Lenin. It has not happened exactly as Lenin said. It has not happened exactly as Lenin said, yet several important conditions cited by Lenin have indubitably occurred. But Johnson says, quote, no such situation as Lenin envisaged is visible in Europe today, end quote. We have merely to ask, if this is so, why then do you say that you support the slogan of national liberation? Obviously, Johnson's support is merely formal. It has no great significance to him. He does not understand his responsibilities to such a slogan. For this reason, the agitational slogan and the programmatic slogan are consistently counterposed throughout his article. Wherever he declares the correctness of the slogan of national liberation, it is qualified by the declaration that the slogan of the United States is, quote, on the order of the day, end quote. And all the emphasis is on the necessity of a, quote, ceaseless pounding day and night of the slogan, the Socialist United States of Europe, end quote. Johnson. The source of Johnson's errors is to be found in his inability to understand the role of the subjective factor in world and European politics, the need of a revolutionary socialist party, and the indispensability of such a party to a solution of any class problem. Instead, we are treated to generalities which in themselves are wrong because they have no relation to any vital concrete situation. He concerns himself with the end aims, without resolving the many steps that must necessarily be traversed before the proletariat can be emancipated. In this presentation, everything is telescoped. For example, the resolution of the Workers' Party argues that there are powerful national barriers between the masses of Europe which must be overcome. Johnson says, quote, "Today these powerful barriers, have been destroyed by a decline in capitalism," end quote. Under the subhead in his article, quote, "The abstract and the concrete," end quote, the author admits three grievous errors, which explain a great deal about the whole contribution. In one place he writes in support of the argument that the socialist United States is more urgent than ever, that, quote, "the most dangerous enemies of the militancy of the workers, the flourishing social democratic and Stalinist bureaucracies, no longer exist," end quote. Whatever world he is writing about, it is certainly not our world, not on this planet. He adds to this erroneous statement another, quote, our hypothetical half a dozen revolutionaries, in Lyon, have an opportunity 100 times greater than in 1939, so long as they do not counterpose theories and slogans to action. End quote. Against whom is Johnson polemicizing? Against the workers who might, quote, counterpose theories and slogans to action, end quote? Obviously, Johnson does not mean the workers. And what theories and slogans should not be counterposed by the workers? It is perhaps the slogan for national liberation? If it is not that slogan and the theory behind the slogan, what is the meaning of the sentence? The author of The Way Out for Europe is unwittingly, the author of, quote, The Way Out for Europe, end quote, by C.R. James, unwittingly supplies the answer. To say that the workers of Lyon have, quote, an opportunity today 100 times greater than in 1939, end quote, means that the possibilities of socialism are today 100 times greater than in 1939. Means that the possibilities of socialism are today 100 times greater than in 1939, and that the power, strength, and organization of the workers are 100 times greater than in 1939. For the word, quote, opportunity, end quote, has no meaning if organization, program, strength, tactics, and strategy are not part of the concept of opportunity. The workers have an opportunity in general, in a historical sense. But the opportunity can never be realized unless it is fortified by the mass organization of the working class, by the existence of the revolutionary vanguard, by the existence of a correct program, and the proper application of this program. This is the idea, above all, which needs to be hammered home incessantly. As if in anticipation of this argument, he says in his third error on page 153, quote, "But, it is urged, the proletariat in the occupied countries is sluggish, is not organized, the revolutionary movement is non-existent, etc. But how much bigger was the revolutionary movement yesterday than it is today? End quote. Here again, Johnson has missed the whole lesson of the meaning of the fascist victories in Europe and their effect upon the proletariat and its organized movements. It seems odd to have to answer such an argument 10 years after Hitler seized power, after the defeats in Spain and France, the victory of Stalinism, and the realities of the Second World War. Prior to the war, a large part of the European labor movement existed. Today, it does not exist. Prior to the war, working-class fraternal organizations were in existence. Today, they have been wiped out. Prior to the war, there were large cooperative organizations. Where are they to be found on the continent today? Prior to the war, there were revolutionary organizations in existence. Where are they today? Their size, their influence, their weight in the labor movement varied. It is true they were not strong, but under the conditions of pre-war Europe, they existed and functioned and had the possibilities of enjoying growth and influence. They existed and functioned and had the possibility of enjoying growth and influence. Today, they do not exist. The problem, to repeat, is one of reconstituting the workers' movement in Europe. and through it to reestablish its organized revolutionary socialist wing. This is the resolution of the Workers' Party. This the resolution of the Workers' Party seeks to do. Johnson has an entirely different conception. The theory which is implicit in his entire analysis of the historical epoch is not a new theory. It is as old as the socialist movement. I have already indicated what it is by saying that he visualizes the development in Europe on the basis of the, quote, spontaneity of the masses, end quote. Otherwise, what is the meaning of the long involved in stratospheric discussion of the general historical stage of present-day capitalism? To show the crisis of capitalism must drive the masses along the socialist road. While this is true, in general, it is only the beginning of the problem. It is only the beginning of the problem. But for Johnson, it is the end of the problem. The end of the problem. To Johnson, which is C.L.R. James, the process is automatic. The process is automatic. The workers must become revolutionized. The workers must become revolutionized. The workers must take the socialist road. The workers must take the socialist road. Yet between the compulsions created by the crisis of capitalism, which makes life for the masses a hellish nightmare, and the organization of the masses for the struggle for power, is a long road. It is the road of organization, education, training, and preparation. Without the existence of strong mass parties of socialism, the working class is hopelessly doomed. Even a correct program is not enough. A correct program can make it possible to reach the masses, to win the masses to socialism, to organize the masses for the struggle, but the vanguard party is the indispensable link between the objective ripe conditions for socialism and the establishment of socialism in one or more countries. But the vanguard party is the indispensable link between the objectively ripe conditions for socialism and the establishment of socialism in one or more countries. Johnson's views are sectarian. In practice, they can never solve the one great problem of the stage, the reorganization and revitalization of the working class movement for socialism. That decisively fundamental idea does not become an integral element in his schema of the European situation. Johnson has sought to create the impression that the position embodied in the resolution of the Workers' Party means postponing the struggle for socialism for an impossibility, national liberation. He is for a socialist United States of Europe now. What he does not comprehend is that the present situation in Europe has created a condition where the struggle for national liberation becomes interlinked with the struggle for socialism. The revolutionary socialists must be in this movement. The revolutionary socialists must be in this movement to lead on the high road of socialism. There's a footnote that I missed. In his strategy of the world revolution, Trotsky wrote, quote, "Politics considered as a historical factor has always remained behind economics," end quote. This observation has been accepted by all Marxists as an unassailable truth. It reveals why economics and politics do not develop simultaneously, why the economic collapse of capitalism does not bring about an automatic and immediate corresponding political response in the part of the masses. For the latter, an additional series of experiences are necessary, plus an unprecedented activity by the vanguard Socialist Party to close the gap between, quote, economics and politics, end quote. So that is the end of the piece. Thank you for listening. This has been from so what was the title again? Sorry, let me get back. I'm scrolling back up to the top. From Anti-Hitlerism to Socialism by Al Glotzer. Al Glotzer. Jesus Christ. Al Glotzer. Thanks for listening.